Contingency reserve usage. A project may contain reserves at two levels. Contingency reserve and management reserve are established to respond to risks so that these risks do not compromise the project. Management reserve is kept aside to cover unknown unknowns or risks that occur but were not accounted for. For the known unknowns or risks that have been kept in the risk register, contingency reserve can be part of the overall risk response strategy. The other key difference between contingency reserve and management reserve is who controls each one. As implied by the name, management reserve is typically set by upper management as a buffer against any unknown risks. Along with the cost baseline, the management reserve is the final piece of a cost budget. On the other hand, the project manager is typically authorized to spend what is in the contingency reserve to address risks as they occur. Therefore, the project manager is accountable for its use. 1. Contingency reserves are used primarily as a valuable risk response strategy in order to safeguard the project against weakening time and monetary costs. A fraction of the time or monetary cost of a risk is added to the pool of risk contingency reserve so that the pool is able to fund any of the risks that may occur. Also, a risk contingency reserve is used to improve the predictability of project outcomes. By summing up all risk contingency costs together so the cost of any risk occurrence can be absorbed, it is easier to track risk occurrence as opposed to additional delays or costs coming out of the actual schedule and budget. 3. Finally, contingency reserves are helpful to communicate the project's stakeholders. In communicating the project's risk profile, the project manager is also communicating the value of adequate risk management and policy, and this helps the maturity of risk management across the organization. There may be at least 3 different ways to quantify contingency reserves. 1. Percentage of project budget. Under this traditional approach, the contingency reserve is commonly developed based on some percentage of project budget. The ever-present 10% rule. Add 10% contingency at the end of a project. It is very simple, but it entails serious weaknesses. It fails to take risks into account, leaving the project susceptible to delays and overruns, and it is impossible to assess the likelihood or justification of such a percentage based on nothing more than previous history. 2. Expected monetary value, EMV. For each risk on the risk register, multiply its frequency or probability times its mean impact or severity. In other words, multiply how often or probable a risk is due to occur times the average or mean cost or time impact it will have. This method does consider risks present on the risk register, but fails to account the likelihood or probability of the contingency reserve being consumed. As it is based on averages, unlikely events of potentially high impact may be underrepresented. 3. Monte Carlo simulation. Using at-risk as a tool to simulate thousands of probable outcomes based on the estimated statistical distributions of each activity and risk, a very clear picture of risk can be shown. Using this tool, the project's management team is able to trace back the relative importance of each activity and risk and commit resources, priorities, and managerial focus onto those areas that will most likely impact the total cost and time output of the project. We will calculate here the 3 approaches and compare its results. Determining contingency reserve as a percentage. Assume the project can be laid out in 10 different activities. For each one of the activities, resource quantities and unit prices have been estimated. These numbers represent the best estimate given by each activity's expert's opinion. These numbers represent the best estimate given by each activity's expert opinion. By multiplying quantity times unit price, you obtain the total cost for each activity line. On the other hand, 3 additional contingent risks are added at the risk register level. Each one of these 3 risks shows a different type of event risk quantification. When adding up the 10 cost estimates plus the 3 identified risks from the risk register, we can come up with a total baseline. In other words, estimates are rolled up into the overall project estimate, and the contingency reserve is added to form the cost baseline. The cost baseline with management reserves is the cost budget for the project. We will exclude at the level of this exercise the management reserve, and we'll only focus at the subtotal level of the cost baseline. 1. On Model tab, go to cell J3 and insert the following formula to calculate the total cost for activity 1 equals B3 times F3. Simply multiply the most likely estimate given for activity 1's quantity times activity 1's price. 2. Copy this function down for all 10 activities. The total activity cost estimate on cell J13 should add up to $100,000. 3. On cell I19, calculate contingency as a percentage of project budget, multiplying the total activity cost estimate on cell J13 times the event risk contingency estimation percentage on the params tab, named Cont level, with the formula equals J13 times Cont level. 4. On cell I21, add the total activity cost estimate, cell J13, to the contingency estimate, cell J19. To obtain the deterministic cost baseline calculated with a percentage contingency rate of 15% with the formula equals J13 plus J19. A total cost baseline of $115,000 is calculated this way. $100,000 tab on the activity cost estimate plus $15,000 as a contingency reserve. As stated before, this first method for determining cost baseline does not tell us anything about the nature, let alone the probability of the additional risks entailed in the project. The next method, EMV, should give us some light on how additional event risks might be considered into contingency estimation. First, though, we need to know a little about the nature of these 3 risks that we will add.